For my major project, I created a VR tower defense game using Unity. I created some of the models I used when designing the level, such as the castle, the tablet, and the table. I also reused a room asset I created in a previous module after talking it over with Jason. There are some models I decided to find online rather than create. These are mostly for enemies, as modelling and rigging and animating every enemy would have been very time consuming, and also would have meant that the quality of the game would have suffered. Some other things I found online are grass and rock textures used on the terrain and the sound effects and background music, as I'm not comfortable in my skill with creating audio and environment textures from scratch. However, with some of the sound effects, I adjusted them to make them better fit the game. For example, I combined multiple tracks together to create the tower building sound, which is different construction sounds such as drill, handsaw, and jackhammer combined in Audacity, as I felt it was a more interesting and fitting sound. I had to adjust some models as the scale of them was too large. For example, with the castle, I created the castle using 3 walls on each side, but when testing, the scale of the arrow compared to the wall was tiny, so I remade it, reduced it to 1 wall per side, and shortened it slightly, which meant it fit much better. And while the inner section seemed more cramped, it gave more of a cartoonish toy feel, which fits the tabletop castle more. There are some models that I created but didn't get to use. One of these is the defense tower. I originally created it and was happy with the design and started working on the programming and different features of the game. When it came time to include them in the game, it felt like they no longer fit well. To save time redesigning and modelling them again, as the programming was harder than I initially thought it was going to be, I found a tower asset on the Unity asset store instead. Another model I created but didn't get to use was the drawbridge. I made this when the level design included a water section, which was a portion that spread around the castle like a moat. However, when trying to get a water plane to work, I found out I had to change the project's render pipeline to either high definition render pipeline or the universal render pipeline. When trying this, I had a lot of issues with the textures and the lighting, as some of the Unity store assets and my own assets weren't designed for use in these render pipelines. And with the lighting, I was getting really weird reflections and bright shines that I couldn't figure out where they were coming from or how to fix them. Which meant, unfortunately, I had to scrap the water idea and redesign the level slightly. I recreated the terrain where, rather instead of an ocean section, I created a second forest with different enemy types to spawn at, but this made the bridge obsolete. One major thing I changed between planning before Christmas and now is I had to remake the base of the game that I had done during the planning. This is because I changed the project from SteamVR plugin to Unity's XR Toolkit. The XR Toolkit is a bit more difficult as it's fairly new and recently got a complete overhaul that made many online aids obsolete. However, it still had much better support for VR development. In SteamVR, the only thing you're really given is the game object that allows for VR headsets and controllers to be used for input. Everything else has to be custom coded, like the grabbing or the teleporting. Whereas the XR Toolkit contains a lot of pre-built things. For example, when grabbing an object rather than programming the entire thing, all I need to do is put an interactive script on the controller and an interactable script on the object, and the player is able to grab things. Same with teleporting. All you need to do is put a teleport interactor script and a ray interactor script on the controller, and put a teleport area which is part of the toolkit, and you're able to teleport. This makes the entire development a lot more streamlined, allowing you to focus on other features like the building tower and enemy spawning. Another benefit of the XR Toolkit is it uses an action-based binding setup that makes development for different VR headsets much simpler. Rather than assign each action to specific controller buttons or triggers, you just assign the action in the code, and then in the menu you give the action bindings. It contains a generic controller, which, say if you want something for a trigger, it'll carry across every controller that has a trigger. But it also has specific controllers like the Vive One Oculus controller or the Valve Knuckle controller, so you can get more specific changes between them. Unfortunately, one downside to using the XR Toolkit is that making it work with the Omni treadmill is much harder and maybe not even possible. It seems like the Omni's development is more aimed at Unreal rather than Unity. One way I considered getting it to work was finding or creating a piece of software that simulates the Omni movement into a joystick value, which I can then use in Unity to move the player. But I don't see it working well, as Omni needs specific software to work and it could take a long time to develop. This could have worked if I was using another treadmill that I found while researching the previous trimester. The Cygrith Virtualizer comes with software that can simulate the joystick, as it's designed to work with many non-immersive VR games. Another change I had to make compared to what I had planned is how the towers would be built in the game. Initially I wanted the player to be able to grab and place the towers on the tabletop. However, I ran into issues with the grab interactable and placing it on the table, as it would either fall over due to the uneven ground of the terrain or be in the wrong place. It was also much more difficult because the player's scale was much larger, which meant the actual scale of movement didn't carry over well, so it felt very floaty when dropping the tower. This is why the tablet was created and attached to the player's hand. It allows them to cycle through the towers and check things like their health and allow them to repair it. I also came up with the demolition function that will allow the player to get some of their money back in return for losing the tower's defences and demolishing the tower. The idea behind this was if the player needed money to repair a defence gate or they would lose in the next round, then they could demolish the tower in order to afford it and survive the round. Overall, I'm happy with how the game turned out, but I feel like it requires more testing by outside participants to get the balance in a better place. I made what adjustments I could see and test, but I originally planned to have something like a Canvas announcement searching for testers. But due to having to remake the game and have some issues, by the time the game was ready for group testing, it was too close to the deadline, as I'd have to make the announcement, get testers in when they are available, document everything, and still make the changes. While I'm happy with how the game is, there are some things I would do differently if I was doing the project again. One of these is looking at different maps. For example, rather than being in a forest, the castle could be atop a mountain surrounded by caverns, caves and canyons. So each area would be distinctly separate. Enemies could go through the caves and interweave like a spider's web surrounding the castle. The other idea I had was for the defense gate to be in a line rather than around the whole castle. Then each gate has different paths leading to it. For example, one going underground, one over a bridge in the sky, one through a forest, etc. The reason for this is I feel like the current level I have right now works better as a tutorial starting area, and then once this player, say, reaches round 5, then it goes to the next full level. Another way I would like to expand on the current game, if I had enough time, was increasing the enemy types to include flying enemies. The reason I didn't do that now is because I'm using the Unity Nav Mesh for AI pathfinding, and I'm not entirely sure how to include that for flying enemies where they are high above the ground. The game is currently on itch.io, and I plan to continue working on this game more in my spare time because I really enjoy VR development and I can keep updating it as I learn more about how the different features of Unity's XR Toolkit can be used.